Stanley Meyer made an announcement today in Colorado Springs. He says he's come up with a device that will hook up to any engine and allow it to run on good old H2O.
About a guy who created a car that runs on water. And as he was dying, he was saying, "They killed me. They killed me."
What if a single invention could have changed the world forever? Stanley Meyer claimed to invent a car that could run on water instead of gas. It was a breakthrough that promised cheaper energy, a cleaner planet, and a brighter future. But then, he died suddenly, and the questions began. Was his death natural, or did someone want him gone? Could powerful groups have stopped him to protect their interests? This is the story of a man, his incredible idea, and the mystery that followed his tragic end. They poisoned me. March 21st, 1998 was the first day of spring. It was a day like any other, or so it seemed. 4 men sat down for a quiet lunch at a restaurant. Nothing out of the ordinary, but one of them, Stanley Meyer, would never finish his meal. He was served a glass of cranberry juice by a waiter, likely to go with his dessert. He took a sip. What happened next is still a mystery. In an instant, Meyer jumped up from the table, holding his neck as if he couldn't breathe. He ran outside, stumbled into the parking lot, and collapsed. His last words were, "They poisoned me." He was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. Meyer was declared dead. Doctors and detectives quickly got to work. After an autopsy and further investigation, they concluded that Meyer had died from a brain aneurysm, which was linked to his past struggles with high blood pressure. No poison was found in his cranberry juice. The case was closed. Most people accepted the story. A man in his 50s died suddenly, perhaps due to his health issues. But some things made this conclusion hard to swallow. For starters, there were his chilling last words. "They poisoned me" wasn't something anyone could ignore. And then there was the bigger picture, the reason Stanley Meyer's life had drawn so much attention in the first place. You see, Stanley wasn't just anyone.
The water atoms to go into an ionization state.
He was connected to something extraordinary, something groundbreaking. He was the inventor of a car that could run on water. It was an invention that promised to shake up industries, challenge powerful interests, and perhaps even redefine how the world viewed energy itself. Stanley had been deeply involved in this revolutionary work. He knew its potential, and maybe, just maybe, he also understood its risks. Was his death truly natural, or was there more to the story? Was it a tragic coincidence? Or could his final words hint at something darker, something carefully hidden? To answer these questions, we have to take a step back and explore the man behind the invention, his work, and the storm of attention it drew. Faith, innovation, and a world in crisis. Stanley Meyer's story didn't begin with his groundbreaking invention, but it was clear from a young age that he wasn't like everyone else. Born on August 24, 1940 in Columbus, Ohio, he grew up on the city's east side before moving to Grandview Heights, where he finished high school. His twin brother, Stephen Meyer, often reflected on their childhood, recalling how the two of them spent endless hours building their own toys. Stanley wasn't just curious, was driven to create. After high school, Stanley joined the military and briefly attended Ohio State University. But academics alone couldn't hold him back from his true passion, which was inventing. He was a deeply religious man too, and often credited God for inspiring his work. One phrase he loved to repeat was, "Praise the Lord and pass the ammunition." Over the years, Stanley became the proud owner of numerous patents. He didn't limit himself to one field either. His inventions covered everything from banking systems to oceanography, cardiac monitoring, and of course, automobiles. A patent, by the way, is like a shield for inventors. It protects their ideas by preventing others from copying or selling them without permission. But out of all his patents, one stood out above the rest. And this was the so-called water-powered car. The idea of a car running on water instead of gasoline sounded almost too good to be true. But for Stanley, it was a solution to a problem the world had faced for decades. To understand the weight of Stanley's work, you have to consider the world he was living in. In 1975, the United States faced the Arabian oil embargo. This was a crisis that sent shockwaves through the economy. Saudi Arabia, the largest oil exporter, had drastically cut its supply to the United States,
resulting in their decision to reduce the flow of oil to America and other nations supporting Israel.
As a result, oil prices skyrocketed, leaving industries scrambling. Gasoline became expensive and hard to find.
All right, now, I started development of the water fuel cell technology.
The American auto industry, which relied on affordable oil, was hit particularly hard. The demand for new cars reduced. This pushed companies to the brink of bankruptcy. In this chaotic environment, the need for innovation wasn't just urgent, it was essential. The world needed alternatives, solutions that could reduce dependence on traditional fuels. Stanley saw an opportunity. He believed he could change the way cars were powered, and with it, the future of energy. But how did one man with a passion for building and a deep sense of faith come up with an idea so bold it challenged entire industries? What exactly was this water-powered car, and why did it stir up such intense debate? To fully understand the impact of Stanley's work, we need to look at the mechanics of his invention and the vision he had for it. And that is where things get even more interesting. The hydrogen fuel cell. Stanley Meyer believed the United States needed to prepare for future oil crises so as to ensure the economy wouldn't grind to a halt if access to oil was cut off again. And so, he got to work. Meyer developed what he called the hydrogen fuel cell car, an invention that, if successful, would change transportation forever. Here is how it worked. Water is made up of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. Meyer said his fuel cell worked by splitting water into its basic components, which are hydrogen and oxygen gas. This was done by a process called electrolysis. Once separated, these gases could be fed into a car's engine, where they would ignite and create combustion, providing energy to power the car. After combustion, the only thing left was water, and this could evaporate harmlessly into the air. It sounded far-fetched, and yet Stanley insisted it worked. He claimed his car could extract enormous amounts of energy from water at a fraction of the cost of gasoline. What's more, he said the process didn't require the significant external electricity that traditional electrolysis methods needed, making it far more efficient. According to him, the hydrogen-powered vehicle would eliminate pollution caused by conventional cars, drastically reducing harmful emissions and potentially slowing global warming. But there were skeptics. Critics pointed out that splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen typically requires a lot of energy, and this energy often comes from non-renewable sources like coal or natural gas. They argued that the process was expensive and wouldn't actually reduce fuel costs. The need for external electricity also raised questions about whether the invention was as groundbreaking as Stanley claimed. Despite this, Meyer believed his invention could reshape the future. He described it as the ultimate solution to not just fuel shortages, but also environmental issues. If his device worked as he claimed, it could reduce global dependence on oil and fossil fuels, solving problems that had loomed over the world for decades. More importantly, water, unlike oil, was abundant and available almost everywhere. The potential was undeniable. A car powered by water could, without doubt, change the way energy was produced and consumed. But Stanley's work didn't stop there. He was determined to prove his invention to the world. The miracle car. It didn't take long for Stanley Meyer's invention to grab attention. After months of refining his fuel cell engine, he had something that wasn't just an idea. It was real. He built a dune buggy powered entirely by his water fuel cell, a creation he believed could rewrite the rules of energy and transportation. The buggy wasn't just functional, it ran like a dream. Meyer insisted that his system needed far less energy to perform electrolysis than what scientists had always assumed. Some accounts even suggested that his electric cell could split ordinary tap water into hydrogen and oxygen with remarkably low energy input. By 1996, Meyer was ready to show the world. That year, he demonstrated his water-powered dune buggy to the media in Washington, D.C. The event wasn't just a test run, it was a statement. He drove the buggy around the Capitol building and the Washington Monument for more than 10 minutes, reaching speeds of up to 40 miles per hour.
I don't care if you use rainwater, well water, city water, ocean water. If you don't have any fresh water, go ahead and use snow.
The demonstration attracted a small but notable crowd, including experts like Professor Michael Lawton, who was the Dean of Engineering at Mary College in London, and Admiral Sir Anthony Griffin, a former controller of the British Navy. Dr. Keith Hindley, a United Kingdom research chemist, was also present. These were respected figures in science and engineering. Each of them seemed impressed by what they saw. They reportedly agreed that Meyer's fuel cell could indeed turn water into hydrogen fuel through electrolysis, and that the amount of hydrogen produced exceeded conventional calculations. To them, it looked like Meyer had achieved something extraordinary, something many in their fields had believed impossible. Meyer explained to the audience that his vehicle could travel 180 kilometers on just 4 liters of water. That meant a single liter of ordinary tap water could power the car for 45 kilometers.
That if we take the dune buggy from Los Angeles to New York, we would roughly use 22 gallons of water.
It sounded like magic, or maybe something straight out of science fiction, but not everyone was convinced. And that's where things took a turn. When an invention promises to solve some of the world's biggest problems, like reducing dependence on oil or cutting harmful emissions, it doesn't just attract admirers. It also attracts skeptics, critics, and sometimes powerful interests that feel threatened. Meyer's bold claims were inspiring, but they also raised a lot of questions. Was it truly possible for his system to produce that much hydrogen with so little energy? And if it was, why weren't other scientists replicating his results? For Meyer, this marked the beginning of his troubles. As word of his invention spread, so did the scrutiny. Some called him a genius, others whispered about fraud, and soon, those whispers would grow louder. Legal problems. Things weren't as perfect as they seemed. While Stanley Meyer's invention had inspired awe and attracted investors, it also brought legal trouble that would tarnish his reputation. What began as excitement over a groundbreaking technology soon turned into a bitter court battle. It all started a few months after Meyer had developed his hydrogen fuel cell. 2 investors who had initially supported him accused him of fraud. They claimed Meyer had sold them dealership rights to use his water fuel cell technology, but the product did not deliver on his promises. In 1996, they took legal action against him. The case drew attention because of Meyer's high-profile claims and his growing list of skeptics. The court arranged for an expert witness, Professor Michael Lawton, to examine the invention. Professor Lawton, a respected authority in electrical engineering and a fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering, was ready to analyze the car and determine if it lived up to its revolutionary claims. But things did not go as planned. On the day of the examination, Meyer reportedly made what Professor Lawton later described as a lame excuse to avoid the test. The lack of cooperation raised eyebrows and only deepened suspicions about the validity of Meyer's invention. Eventually, the court brought in 3 additional expert witnesses to evaluate the water fuel cell. Their findings were disappointing for Meyer and his supporters. According to them, the device was not revolutionary at all. Instead, they concluded it was simply a standard electrolysis system, nothing innovative or groundbreaking. When the trial ended, the judge delivered a harsh verdict. He ruled that Meyer had committed gross fraud, stating that the funds Meyer had received from the investors were obtained through deception. The court ordered Meyer to return the money to the investors. For someone whose career depended on his ability to innovate and inspire trust, the outcome was devastating. Meyer's troubles didn't end with the financial consequences. His credibility, which had been central to his work, was now in ruins. For a man who had positioned himself as a pioneer in eco-friendly automotive technology, the court's ruling was more than just a financial setback. It was a blow to his honor and legacy. But even as the dust settled from the trial, Meyer's story wasn't over. Other forces were still in play, and new challenges were just around the corner. Subscribers. Pick. Now it's time for today's subscribers pick, and it's a wild one. On the left, there is a man standing next to a bright red car that boldly displays the words "water-powered" along with "Jesus Christ is Lord" painted on the side. This is reportedly Stanley Meyer, the man who claimed to invent a car that could run entirely on water. But the second image takes a dark turn. It appears to show a violent and shocking scene, with a uniformed man holding a blade to another man's throat. The victim is kneeling, shirtless, with blood covering his chest. Many believe this photo is part of a conspiracy theory about Meyer's untimely death. You may have heard the phrase floating around online. FBI leaked footage of Stanley Meyer death after revealing his water-powered car. It's a bold claim, but it shows just how much mystery and intrigue surrounds his story. What do you think? Was Meyer really a victim of a larger cover-up? Or are these just theories built on speculation and coincidence? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. The cost of genius. Threats, bribes, and secrets had become part of Stanley Meyer's life long before his story took its darkest turn. The man who once seemed destined to revolutionize the world with his water-powered car was also a man living under constant pressure. He believed his invention could change the future, but others saw it as a threat to their power and profits. Stanley's brother, Stephen Meyer, once shared a story that highlighted just how intense the pressure had been. In the 1980s, Stanley had received a phone call at home. After hanging up, he had turned to Stephen and mentioned an offer of $800 million to sell the rights to his invention. Stephen remembered telling his brother to accept it, jokingly asking, "How much money do you want?" But Stanley hadn't laughed. Instead, he had grown quiet, deep in thought. Stephen knew his brother well enough to leave him alone when he was like that. Stanley later admitted that such offers weren't uncommon. He had often been approached by individuals or groups willing to pay enormous sums of money if he would sell his invention or abandon it altogether. He once mentioned that over the years, he had been offered many deals to sell out or sit on the technology, but he had refused every time. One story from the 70s stood out as both strange and revealing. During that time, Stanley had lived briefly with Charles and Valerie Hughes, a couple who owned a home in Jackson Township. According to them, Stanley had shown up unexpectedly at their door one day, claiming that he had been sent by God. He asked if he could use their home to conduct experiments. Surprisingly, the family had agreed. In return for their kindness, Stanley had built them a solar-powered silo to heat and cool their home. Charles Hughes described Stanley as a deeply religious and trustworthy man. He said he had never worried about Stanley taking advantage of them because he simply didn't seem like the type. They left quickly after meeting with him. Moments later, more vehicles arrived, this time military ones. Soldiers and officials questioned Stanley about the visit, clearly concerned about the meeting with the men in turbans. That evening at dinner, Stanley explained to the family what had happened. He said the visitors had offered him $250 million to stop his work immediately. He told the Hughes family that he had refused, joking that they could have lived in peace and luxury if he had accepted. The mystery of the Belgian investors. Some stories don't end the way they should, especially when they involve inventions that could change the world. Stanley Meyer's life was already surrounded by intrigue, but his sudden death brought a shadow of suspicion that has never really lifted. Now, remember when we mentioned that Stanley died while dining at a restaurant? There is more to that story. He wasn't just with anyone on that day. Sitting at the table with him were his brother, Stanley Meyer, and two Belgian investors. The meeting wasn't supposed to be unusual, but what had happened left many wondering if it was a coincidence or something far more sinister. Stanley Meyer later recalled that the Belgian investors' behavior that day didn't sit right with him. After Stanley collapsed and died, Stephen informed them of his brother's passing. Strangely, they didn't react at all. He admitted that from that moment on, he could never trust them again. People who believe in conspiracy theories argue that Stanley's invention may have attracted the wrong kind of attention. Some claim his work posed a threat to powerful industries or governments, and that his death wasn't natural. While the official cause of death was reported as an aneurysm, this hasn't stopped the rumors. Many people still insist that Meyer's invention, the water-powered car, was the reason for his untimely death. They argue that his work, if proven successful, could have disrupted the global oil industry and shifted the balance of power in ways some might have wanted to prevent. The events surrounding his passing left too many unanswered questions. Why did the investors remain silent? What exactly was discussed at that meeting? But the mysteries didn't end there. Strange things were about to happen involving Stanley's work, his invention, and what he left behind. A legacy stolen. Stanley Meyer's death wasn't the final chapter in his strange and controversial journey. What happened after he passed raised new questions, not just about his invention, but about the people who may have wanted to control it or bury it forever. Stanley Meyer, Stanley's brother, revealed that just a week after his death, something strange occurred. Stanley's hydrogen-powered dune buggy, along with many of his instruments, vanished from his garage. They had been stolen. He explained that the buggy was eventually found, but the details of how or where it was recovered remain unclear. It seemed as though someone wanted it, though their reasons are anyone's guess. After the vehicle was retrieved, it was locked away in a room without doors, supposedly to protect it from tampering or destruction. Supporters of Stanley's work saw this as a necessary step to safeguard his invention. On the other hand, critics claimed it was a way to prevent anyone from closely examining the technology, perhaps to hide weaknesses in the patent. Years passed, and in 2014, the dune buggy reportedly resurfaced. By then, it was said to be owned by the Holbrook family, who were rumored to have been associates of Stanley. The vehicle had made its way to Canada, though how it got there remains a mystery. Some believed it may have been sold by Stephen while others speculated about more shady dealings. Beyond that, the trail goes cold, leaving the fate of the buggy unknown. It is a story that refuses to settle, full of loose ends and lingering doubts, keeping the mystery alive for those who remain convinced there was more to Meyer's work than the world was allowed to see. And yet, despite all the unanswered questions, this isn't where Stanley Meyer's legacy ends. A dream unfulfilled. Stanley Meyer's dream of a car powered by water is still a topic that fascinates people today. While he passed away under mysterious circumstances, his ideas sparked a movement toward alternative energy sources. Now, companies like Toyota and Honda are selling hydrogen fuel cell-powered cars. These vehicles use hydrogen to create energy and emit only water vapor, which feels like a step toward the future Meyer envisioned. But even with all the advancements, nothing quite matches what Meyer claimed his invention could do. Modern hydrogen fuel systems aren't exactly the same as Meyer's design. Most of today's systems produce something called HHO, or Brown's gas, which is added to fuel systems to boost efficiency. It's clever, but it's not the same as a car running entirely on water. Meyer's invention promised a world without gasoline, where cars could travel long distances powered by just a few liters of water. That bold idea was what made his work so exciting and controversial. Interestingly, most of Meyer's patents have now expired. They're available online for anyone to view or even use without restrictions or royalty payments. Despite this, no major car manufacturer has taken up his designs. For all the curiosity and interest his work generated, it hasn't been fully embraced. Some say this is because his claims were too good to be true. Others think it's because his work was suppressed by those who stood to lose if gasoline were replaced. One author once wrote about Meyer's life and noted how overlooked he was. The writer said Meyer was ignored, called a fraud, and passed away without his small hometown even acknowledging his achievements with a plaque or memorial. It's a sad thought for someone whose ideas could have changed the world. Stephen Meyer, Stanley's twin brother, is often brought up when people discuss the hydrogen fuel cell. He is said to be the only person alive who truly understands how Stanley's invention worked. But Stephen has made it clear that he won't continue his brother's work. After everything Stanley went through, the criticism, the threats, and the constant battles, it's not hard to see why. Stephen has chosen to leave it all behind. And so, Stanley Meyer's story remains an unfinished chapter in the world of innovation. His water-powered car was more than just a technical invention. It was proof of what humanity could achieve if it dared to dream big. But the details of his work and the truth of what really happened remain out of reach. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.